Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're all super happy and excited that you joined us today, and thank you very, very much for taking your time. And of course, a warm welcome to this SAP Community Call today. My name is Lena Stodal. I am part of the SAP Community and Influencers team, and I'll be your technical host for this session today. And you're here because you want to kickstart your Kyma runtime journey. And just recently, we had Kyma Runtime as our topic of the month in SAP Community, meaning we featured and promoted Kyma Runtime on our homepage, and there's plenty of great content out there already. We have blog posts, a lot of executive blog posts, all for your convenience to read into it. And this community call is all about for you to know how to get started. And this is where now my three speakers of this community call today come into place. So let me introduce Marco Dorn, Gaurav Abi, and Jamie Cawley to you. They are part of the product management team of Kyma Runtime, and they basically want to recap with you on how to get started and to give you hands-on practice tips on where to find information to discover Kyma Runtime's full capabilities for your convenience. They will present for like the next 35 to 40 minutes, and then afterwards we'll have time for Q&A. You don't have to hold back your questions, so if there's any questions that pop up in your mind in between, don't hesitate to put them into the Q&A. You can find that at the bottom of your screen, and they'll tackle your questions then after they presented all the great insights to you. And with that being said, I'll hand over to you, Marco.
Thanks, Lena, and welcome as well from my side and from our side. So we are all part of the product management team of the Kyma Runtime, which is including as well the Kyma open source project. And as said, what we would like to do is to spark your interest to get started, to kickstart your Kyma journey, meaning I will start by just showing some slides to put the Kyma Runtime into perspective. It's a rather new environment or a new runtime. It was launched only in May of this year. So I will put it into perspective with regards to the SAP Cloud Platform and as well the other runtimes which are available. But then quickly hand over to Jamie, who will show you a demo with an extension of SAP S/4HANA Cloud and Kyma Runtime. And then afterwards, Gaurav will take over to show you a bit more detailed the different components which are part of the Kyma runtime, and we will conclude the presentation part with information on where you can take it from here, like how you can make use of Kyma runtime, meaning what are the different offerings that are available, but as well what are links to follow up, like to continue your journey and then get started quite nicely and easily. Some information of what we will talk about is planned functionality. So we have to show the disclaimer. So whenever we say something is planned, don't base any buying decisions on that. But now let's really get started. So you probably know this picture. So this is the story of the cloud platform. So it's all about making it easier to integrate SAP and non-SAP solutions. So that's the integration suite component of Cloud Platform. And then there's the other story, which is called the extension suite. And as the name says already, it makes it easier for you to extend SAP solutions and combine them as well with non-SAP solutions. And the Kyma runtime, like all the other different runtimes, are part of the extension suite. So if you look one level deeper into the extension suite, you see all the different components of that, like of this kind of umbrella term, from like low code, no code tools, from different tools to create or to customize business processes and so on, down to actual runtimes where you then deploy your extension or your application and where it actually lives. And for that purpose, so to find a place where you can then deploy and run your extensions or your applications, SAP Cloud Platform offers 4 different types of runtimes. And you probably heard about most of them, and now we will deep dive into the Kyma runtime. But just to bring it into perspective, I mean, there's the Cloud Foundry runtime, as the name already, like the new name actually. Before it was called Application Runtime, now it's called Cloud Foundry Runtime, as the name already indicates. This is based on the open source project Cloud Foundry. Its main target, or the main programming language that is usually promoted in context of Cloud Foundry, is Java and JavaScript. It's tightly bundled to the cloud application programming model. Yeah, it's a bit higher up, so to say, in the technology stack. So there are quite some things which are taken care of for you in the Cloud Foundry runtime, or when you make use of it in the context, especially when extending, for example, the S4 application. And then next to it, there's a serverless runtime. And here again, the name speaks for itself. So this is purely for serverless functions. Particularly interesting when getting started with a smaller use case first. Then you can easily deploy it. It scales down to 0 as well from a cost perspective, and then grows depending on the invocations and the size and the number of like functions that you create in there. And then to the very right, there's the ABAP runtime. Again, the name says it all. So this is really if you look for a place to deploy your ABAP code in the cloud. I mean, that's then the go-to place. And then as a fourth runtime type, there's now the Kyma runtime since May of this year. And this is really the Kubernetes offering from SAP, but it's not a pure Kubernetes. There are some more pieces included in the Kyma runtime, as you will see it later on. And here it's really about like a place or a home for you if you want to build your extension or your application on a microservice with a microservice architecture. If you want to containerize those microservices in Docker containers and run them in the cloud platform and make use of all the other cloud platform services, and maybe even combine this with serverless functions, as there's well as serverless runtime included. So if so this is then really the go-to place, the go-to runtime within cloud platform. So if you look at now all the things that I mentioned, like microservice-based architecture, it's based on open source. It's very close to Kubernetes as a platform. So a highly scalable environment. This is really what defines cloud native development. So this is well the target persona that we focus on with when talking about the Kyma runtime. So it's really the cloud native developer. So with all the different aspects of the definition per se, what cloud native means, or cloud native development, it's really what we want to make easier with the Kyma runtime while fitting into the cloud platform, into the domain model, into making sure you can consume more and more services from cloud platform from within Kyma, while fitting into the whole user management and so on and so forth. So just to summarize on a higher level so that you can better understand Jamie's demo, what's inside the Kyma runtime. So it's not a pure like a Kubernetes, because we don't want to compete with the hyperscalers on that level. But what we looked at with the Kyma open source project on which this is based, and then of course now with the managed offering, is what else do you need typically when you want to get started when for building or for running microservice-based architectures and containerized applications. So of course, you want to control like how the service talk to each other. So we've got a service mesh built in, and it's part of that service. So you can like make sure like route the communication and do the proxying and so on for the services. Then as well built in there is a serverless engine, meaning if you have some parts of your application that can simply be realized with a function, you can use the serverless runtime, like the serverless engine inside Kyma. Then you can combine it with the microservices that you have deployed, or you can trigger either of the two with events and so on, and just realize parts of your demand with a pure function, and the others then maybe with microservices that you deploy into the Kyma runtime. And of course, to react to events, there needs to be an event bus built in. So this particularly works with the SAP Customer Experience solutions that can be extended with the Kyma runtime. namely SAP Commerce Cloud, SAP Field Service Management, and SAP Cloud for Customer. So if you connect those applications and hook them up with the Kyma runtime, you can, or the Kyma runtime can then listen to the events coming from those applications, and you can react and trigger either like a service or a serverless function with those events. Then if you want to expose your extension, either for integrating it into an online shop, for calling it from another application, or from like a mobile app and so on, of course, you need to be able to provide APIs. So what's built in as well is an API gateway. So you can expose the functions and the services, you can secure the API, and then you can make them reachable from the outside world. And we've got as well service catalog built in, meaning you can instantiate the applications that you connected, and therefore make them bind them to one to an extension or to an application that you deployed. And furthermore, we support the Open Service Broker API standard. So if you have external services, or if you use the service brokers from the hyperscalers, you can instantiate then those services via the service catalog, and then easily talk to those APIs as well. And so the nice part here is, like, with this out-of-the-box connectivity to SAP applications, with the service catalog, and therefore the consumption of third-party services, when you don't need to worry about authenticating against those service instances, like not while developing, only when setting up the runtime and the different namespaces in which you want to consume those services. So this really comes in handy when like for the development team, so that they can easily get started with the actual business requirement and not worry about how to consume those different services. And everything, as I said, it's built in open source. You will see it later on. So we try to use as many open source projects as possible, combine them into the Kyma runtime. We built something on top for the application connectivity, and open source that as well. So it's fully transparent on what's part of Kyma open source. And most of those components are as well available in the Kyma runtime. But as this should show, like the webinar, the intention is really to give you a kickstart on your Kyma journey. Let's rather look into a demo. So what we prepared is we use the Kyma runtime to build and like to realize a small extension case to SAP S/4HANA Cloud. So while the typical means and services and so on of cloud platform, we do an address validation whenever a business partner has been created or updated. So what it does is it takes the address which has been stored or connected to that business partner, validates it against an API. In this case, we just use a simple Google Maps API, and then update the business partner with that information. So for example, if the zip code was wrong and so on, it gets corrected so that you have nice master data as part of your business partner. And so for that, let me hand over to Jamie, who will then show you how this looks like, and as well like what of like how the different components that you need for it to look like.
Thank you, Marco. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let me share my screen. And let me know that you can see it, please. Looking good. Okay, so right now, this is the S/4HANA system. So I'm going to start off with just showing you the demo, and then I'll just give a brief overview of how this is all connected and how it is working. So in S/4HANA, I have the tile to just come directly into a business partner for SAP. So I'll open that up. And as Marco mentioned, the idea is that if once you were editing or adding a new business partner, that there's a potential that you accidentally enter in an incorrect address. So the idea here is that if I by accidentally typed a 9 instead of a 0 for the zip code and saved it, that this is going to kick off a process to basically validate that that address is either correct or not correct. And if it is incorrect, it would go ahead and fix it and then submit a call back into S/4HANA to correct the entry that you put in here. So you see there, you can see it at the top here that I have this 69199. So now if I refresh this page, you'll see that it corrected it back to the 90. Okay, so let's talk about how this actually is put together. So the first step really is pairing this S/4HANA system to the cloud platform, and that is done in your global account by creating a system. And a system is just really you enter a name and then a type, and in this case we're using S/4HANA Cloud, and that really just provides you like a token URL that you see here, and this URL is just used on the S/4HANA system in this case to pair the two systems together to basically establish trust. And so once that's done, the next pieces that we're going to look at here is the entitlements of the system. So these are the the services that we're using in this scenario to enable it. So you'll see here in a second here will come up. My system's a little slow here. But so the two in question here is this S/4HANA Cloud Extensibility service and enterprise messaging. So I'll show you them inside of Kyma and how they look and how you actually utilize them. And you also, in this scenario, we have a subscription to enterprise messaging. So basically what happens is when we change the business partner, we're using enterprise messaging to consume that event and then push it to our Kyma runtime. So you can see here in the enterprise messaging application, we have two clients. So one client is receiving that message, and then one client is used to push it off to Kyma. So now this is the Kyma runtime, and you'll see here I have a couple different namespaces here. This stuff is all implemented in this S/4HANA namespace. And you can see when we come down to this, the service catalog here, you'll see these are all the different services, and you'll see those entitlements that I just mentioned. So you see enterprise messaging, and you'll see this S/4HANA Cloud Extensibility. And so you see that there's a number here that indicates that we have a couple of different service classes or service instances provisioned. So if I come into the service management instances menu option, I can see the different ones that I have provisioned. And basically what we do in here is we create a service instance of enterprise messaging, and you can see basically what you do is just provide a name and then some properties to indicate how to receive events and filter them out into that queue. And we also have two instances of cloud extensibility. So one is for messaging, which is basically pairing up our S/4HANA system and our enterprise messaging together. And we also have one for API access. So in the case that we need to change the value, this one would be used to then submit the information back to the S/4HANA system that we're using here. So this basically this is a communication arrangement, and basically what that does is just enable the two systems to talk together by creating like a technical user. And then all the functionality is done just with a serverless function here. So you'll see here I got these functions, and I have this address validation function, and this is just using Node.js code. So you'll see down here we have some environment variables, and they come from those service instances. So if I switch over to the configuration tab, you can see I have one service binding, and that's bound to this one instance. And this is the instance that's giving me access to call back into the S/4HANA cloud system to update the business partner in question here. And then you'll notice here, so Marco mentioned we're using the Google Maps API to correct the address. So the basic flow here is that we receive the event out of enterprise messaging, and that would just have our business partner in it. And we would call back into S/4HANA Cloud to get the addresses related to that business partner. And there could be there's at least one, but there could be multiple addresses. So the idea behind this is that using that address data, we create a string and then send it off to Google Cloud or the Google API, and that will then return us a result correcting that address if necessary. And then I just do a comparison to see if I do need to submit it back to the S/4HANA cloud system or not. And in the case that I do, then I would just submit a callback. So you'll just see some JavaScript code that really just handles all that information here. And you'll see also down in the logs that basically what happened. So you'll see that I received this business partner, and you'll notice there's I have a log here that's saying corrections necessary. It's going to update it, and then this update will actually kick off another event. And so you'll see it in here as well again, but the secondary event will indicate that no corrections were necessary, so it won't submit another callback using the API. But I think that covers like the demo I wanted to present, so I think I can now hand it off to Gaurav.
Thanks, Jamie. So I'll just take off from here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about Kyma in a bit details. I will talk about the various Kyma components. And let's first quickly have an overview, and then we can just do something like also do a live demo of all the Kyma components that is there. So let me quickly share my screen. Just let me know when you can see it.
It looks good.
Yeah, thank you. So starting with the what Kyma runtime is. So basically Kyma runtime is a Kubernetes cluster with a lot of added functionality that makes it really easy and fast and make it cloud native for the developers to extend various SAP as well as non-SAP systems. So behind the scenes, we use another SAP open source project called Gardener. And Gardener is acting as a Kubernetes as a service solution for us. So it basically manages the various Kubernetes clusters. So it is similar to AKS and EKS, but it's own SAP grown solution that we have open source. At present, it's possible to deploy the managed Kyma runtime on the Azure landscape. And in future, we have also plans to enable it for the other hyperscalers. So what you get with the Kyma runtime is that it is fully operated by SAP. So you get all the SAP contractual SLAs, and then any kind of updates, security patches to the Kubernetes, to Kyma is taken care by the SAP in this case, because SAP is operating it on your behalf. So going further, one of the most important thing, as Jamie has demonstrated, is possible to run lightweight serverless functions or the lambdas in the Kyma runtime. They are built on top of kubeless. So kubeless basically takes care of basically taking your code which you write in the console or submit it via a kubectl and then creating a Docker image behind the scenes. So this all magic is done by the kubeless behind the scenes for you. Then so basically this is how this function looks like. So it's a lightweight serverless engine, and it's also auto scalable. We will also see that in a while. And it is possible to have this serverless or lambdas exposed as extensions or as APIs over the internet in a secured fashion, as well as event trigger. So basically you can say that, hey, this is my lambda, and then I want it to be get triggered whenever a customer purchases something or whenever a new account is created. So you can configure those things via the event triggers. At the same time, you can expose the lambda over internet so that some external clients like a browser or a mobile application can then make a call to either fetch some data or do some updates via this extension logic. And it's also possible to consume SAP cloud platform services, as well as the services coming from the hyperscalers such as Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud Platform via service catalog and binding them to the lambdas. Then we have the microservices. So you can build your Docker containers and then deploy them as standard Kubernetes deployments and then expose them as Kubernetes services there. Yeah, so you get the same kind of features. It's also possible to make them auto scalable. So from a functionality wise, the features are at par with what you get with the Lambdas. The only difference is that for the Lambda, there is a inbuilt editor and a functionality in the console with which you can create those Lambdas. Then behind the scenes, we are using the service mesh. So service mesh makes your whole setup and your workloads secure by default. And they are communicating with mutual TLS behind the scenes. So if you have multiple microservices and then you have some kind of intercommunication happening, you don't need to worry about the security aspects there, because the service mesh and Istio takes care of ensuring that it is secure and it's using mutual TLS. Then with Istio, you also get the service discovery. So all the services that you deploy inside the Kubernetes cluster, they are discoverable by the other services that want to consume it. And as a part of this service mesh, you also get some of the observability benefits, for example, traceability and monitoring. And with the monitoring by default for the services or the workloads that you deploy inside the Kubernetes, that the default metrics are auto available. For example, the request throughput and latency and other parameters, you don't need to build them by yourself. Istio takes care of creating those metrics for you out of the box. Yeah, so then we have the micro gateway. Micro gateway is again built on top of NY and Ori. So these two components help us enable the Lambdas as well as the microservices in a secure fashion to the outside world, and then to be able to consume it by the clients. So it's possible to basically make them secure via OAuth or an external identity provider. So you don't need to just expose them. You can also securely expose them. Yep. So it supports both OAuth and JWT mechanism, and then it is kind of injectable for that. And you can do it for both the Lambdas and the microservices. Then comes the application connector. So the application connector is basically enables connecting the SAP as well as the non-SAP applications in a secure fashion. So with the connectivity protocol that this application connector exposes, you can register the APIs and events from the external system, which can be SAP or a non-SAP system. And then those APIs and events are available inside Kyma runtime for the developers to consume and build their extensions against them. So this is how a bit it looks like. So you can see your applications and systems. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to switch to the console so that we can just see some of these components in action. So basically, once we reach the Kyma console, this is the default landing page. Here you have the namespaces. So basically, namespaces are the Kubernetes concept of logically grouping your workloads. So you can have different namespaces for different projects or different environments or different teams as you see fit, how you want to segregate your workload. So this is basically totally up to you. And if we look at the next part, so we have the integrations, and this part talks about the applications and systems. So in the central management plane that Jamie had shown, all the systems which you connect with this Kyma runtime, they are shown up here as the systems inside the Kyma runtime. And then as a developer, it is possible for me to do the namespace binding with different namespaces, which is basically a way of saying that I want to build some workloads and then consume the data from this particular system. For example, if I want to have this commerce namespace bound to a product recommendation, this system bound to product recommendation namespace, this essentially means that in this particular namespace, then I have the access to the APIs and events coming from this, this particular system. In the diagnostic section, we have the logs. So it is possible to look at the logs from the different namespaces. You can always select which namespace you want to look for, or basically you can go for other filter. You can go for a name of the function or the container and all those kind of filter parameters you can provide. It's also possible to look at the logs for a particular Lambda, as we have seen what Jamie has shown for his demo part. And once we go into, let's say, one of the namespaces, for example, in the product recommendation, so you see that the menu is a bit different here. And here now the functionality is more in the context of this particular namespace. So the first thing we have is the catalog here. And in the catalog, we have by default the various SAP services SAP Cloud Platform services that are consumable via the entitlements. So you can create an instance of one of these services, for example, for enterprise messaging, and then you can write a logic to either publish some events, or you can maybe write do some management functions for this enterprise messaging. For example, you want to create the webhooks or subscriptions, so you can do all the stuff against those services. So at the same time, also it is possible to consume the services from the hyperscalers. And let's say as a developer, I'm building some logic, and then I want to consume some services from Azure. So it is possible to provision the Azure service broker. And the directions are mentioned here as a part of this console UI. So once I follow these directions and then I create an instance as I've done in this part, it is possible then to basically access the various Azure services. So these Azure services like Azure Redis Cache or Blob Storage, they are coming because I have provisioned this Azure broker as a part of this namespace. Then talking further, we have the API rules. So API rules basically enables me to expose my microservices as well as Lambdas over the internet. So for example, here I have a couple of microservices and one Lambda that is exposed over the internet. And if I look at this, it is always possible to expose them securely. So I can always choose which kind of mechanism I want to do for. And at the same time, it is also possible to have different paths with the different access strategies. So maybe for some static files, I don't want any security, but for some of the APIs where I need authentication and authorization, I can say that I want to have maybe JWT or auth as a authorization mechanism. Yep. And then looking at the functions, when we talk about the functions part, so the functions we have already seen in the demo, but just going over the configuration part, it is possible to make the functions auto-scalable. So as a part of the configuration, I can say that I want a minimum replica of 1, but a maximum of some higher number. So if the load increases and then there is a high CPU threshold reached, the system will automatically create more replicas for your functions. The same thing can also be done for the microservices. For the microservices, the flow is a bit different. You need to create something called as a horizontal pod autoscaler by yourself. It is a Kubernetes resource, and then you can create and apply it on the Kyma cluster, then that your microservice will also becomes autoscalable. At the same time, it's also possible to configure the resources for this function in the same way you can do it for the microservices. So I can specify the minimum amount of resources from a CPU and a memory perspective this Lambda requires. At the same time, I can also set the limits for that, so that in case there is some kind of a bad logic written by a developer or some kind of a crazy while loop, you don't end up consuming a lot of resources for your Lambdas. So you can control all those things. Then we have the event triggers, and I can always configure an event trigger for all the systems that are connected to this namespace. They are available here. For example, in this case, this namespace is connected to the commerce system, and I can select what all events I want this Lambda to be triggered. So basically, then I can write my logic to handle those events and then react on this one. Then we have the service bindings. So for the service bindings, I'll just go to the instances because there it's easier to explain. So whenever I want to consume any of the services, for example, let's say I want to consume the Azure Redis cache. So I will create an instance for this one. And once the instance is created, then I can make it possible that my various Lambdas and microservices can start using this particular backing service or database. So for that case, what I need to do is I need to do something called a binding. So in this case, I have already bound it to my various microservices and functions. But in case I want to bind it to another Lambda, I can always do a bind application, and it will show up all the listed microservices and functions that are available in this namespace. I can select one of them, and then I can choose whether I want to use the existing credentials or I want to create a new one. So once this binding happens, it automatically injects the environment variables required to consume these microservices into the environment of your Lambda or a microservice. So basically, these credentials which are shown here, they are automatically available as environment variables. And then as a developer, you don't need to hard code them in your logic. And this makes it more secure. At the same time, it makes the rotation of the credentials quite easy. You can always come here and then create a new set of credentials and then delete the other ones and then make your applications use those credentials. So they're automatically injected it for you. So if we look at this, yeah, for the auth clients, if in case you want to secure your APIs that are exposed over the internet via auth, so Kyma comes with its own auth server. You can create an auth client and then you can configure the same thing when you are configuring your API rules. Yep. Then we have the config maps. So with the config maps, you basically can create some of the configurations which are not confidential, and then you want it to be to make it available to your deployments or Lambda. So you can do it via creating these config maps. For the microservices, there are deployments that can be used for deploying it. So you can come to these resources. So either you can do it via the kubectl, or you can deploy a resource by providing the YAML file here. So if you create a deployment definition, which is a standard Kubernetes resource as a YAML or a JSON, you can just drop it here and then it will be deployed in your namespace. So one thing to mention on top of that, here you can get the kube config. So if you are coming from the Kubernetes world, with this kube config, you can run the kubectl commands. So it is important that in case you are building some kind of a CI/CD pipelines, then you can use this kubectl, or you can also, using this kube config, you can get another kubectl that is valid for longer time, and then you can build your CI/CD pipelines against that. The secrets are basically for securing any confidential data. In case you have some kind of credentials that you want to store and provide it to your microservice, you can create the Kubernetes secrets and then bind it to your microservice for that. So any questions or comments so far?
Yes, we have some questions in the Q&A. 3 questions are in there right now.
Should we answer them at this point and then just go to the further resources and where to get started afterwards?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, so I think one you already as well mentioned or like answered in the chat. So how is the serverless runtime different from the Kyma runtime? Both are using Kubernetes as a foundation to scale up and down. And yes, while that is true, the technology foundation is the same. As you saw just from like what Gaurav has shown in detail, and as well the flow that Jamie showed before, you can do much more with the Kyma runtime and really deploy your containers, your microservices into the Kyma runtime. So what you build here or what you can deploy here actually is much bigger than just a function. The function is always good for demo purposes and as well to get started for you, like with a use case and take it from there. But pretty soon you will come to the point where you want to do it rather as a microservice instead of a function. Then the next question I can take as well, and then maybe Jamie, you can take the one about enterprise messaging. So the next question, what is the different approach from Kyma runtime to the project Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes? Isn't this a parallel work stream in SAP? So no, actually. So here with the Kyma runtime, you really get access to the Kubernetes cluster that is created with the Kyma runtime. As Gaurav said, with the kubectl and so on, you can directly like make use of all the advantages from Kubernetes to deploy the services, to create replicas and so on and so forth. While the project to migrate Cloud Foundry or to bring Cloud Foundry to Kubernetes is just that the underlying platform for Cloud Foundry would then in the end be as well container-based Kubernetes, and then running on Kubernetes. But you wouldn't see it in the Cloud Foundry runtime. You would never notice that this is running on Kubernetes unless you see it in blogs or whatsoever. But in the end, you don't touch the Kubernetes when you work with the Cloud Foundry runtime because you don't want to. There's no need to. Whereas here, if you decide to use the Kyma runtime, you have a reason to do so because of the architecture, because of maybe what you built already before, and now you want to run it in cloud platform. Then Jamie, so is the use of enterprise messaging the only way to consume events from SAP systems in Kyma?
Sure. So when we were looking at the different systems that you can connect through the cloud platform, you notice I think there's like 5 or so in there. So some of them are CX based, and some of them are, the other ones are like Success Factors and S/4HANA Cloud. So for Success Factors and S/4HANA Cloud, they were originally, before we had Kyma, they were using enterprise messaging. So they continue to use that for the time being, which is what our scenario was showing. The CX systems, when they register into Kyma, like Gaurav was showing some of this, that they register API and event specs into the Kyma runtime, and those can then be consumed directly into Kyma. So during that registration process of that system in question that receives that URL that I showed you, that it's like a token URL, and that registration process happens, that system would receive a URL to publish events to, and that's basically the URL that is related to the event mesh inside of Kyma. So there's the capabilities through enterprise messaging, consuming events, as well as capabilities directly in Kyma to consume events. And Gaurav also showed you the ability to expose either functions or microservices through APIs. And you could, if you're, you could also tie them in by using webhooks of whatever the provider is that is publishing events as well. So I'd say there's 3 different options.
Cool, thank you. And then one last question, another question from Abdul. I think, I don't know if I get it right, but I think it's a twofold question. So one is, how can I deploy an extension which I then can consume from within the Spartacus storefront? And for those that don't know it, so Spartacus is a decoupled storefront from SAP Commerce Cloud. And maybe the second part, or like a second part of the question is, can you deploy this Spartacus storefront as well within the Kyma runtime?
So Mark, maybe you can show it. Yeah, I think that would be nice. So we have actually one demo where we have done the same. So for the part of this demo, we have this Spartacus itself deployed on Kyma. So we created a Docker image out of the Spartacus and then just exposed it over the internet via the API rule. So this is the Spartacus instance. And then regarding the second part where, sorry, where how I can basically consume the extensions from Spartacus. So you can expose any of these extensions. For example, this recommendation service is called from the Spartacus to get the recommendations. And in that case, you can expose it over the internet. And from the Spartacus, then you can make the calls like making the normal API calls. For example, in Spartacus, you are normally making the API calls to get the data from the Commerce Cloud. Similarly, you will also have to write the logic or extend your Spartacus single page application to make the calls to this extension that is deployed on top of Kyma runtime. You just need to expose it over internet. You can make it secure the way you want, and then you can make the calls from the Spartacus via that.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe then let's look into like the further readings and so on, and how you can get started yourself. And in parallel, of course, you can add more questions to the chat, or sorry, to the Q&A pod. So what we of course have is content at TechEd, and the registration has now started for the virtual TechEd event. So those are the 4 sessions that are that cover as well partly Kyma. It's part of the extension story, and then the third one here, the third line here, the Dev 261. So that's actually a hands-on workshop where we will walk through the Get Started tutorials, or where we will support you to walk through the Get Started tutorials with the Kyma runtime. So if you decide to join that, the live session, one of the 2 options, then you will actually meet us again, and we will support you in getting through the Get Started tutorials here. If you go one further, this is showing how you can, if you go to the next slide, it shows how you can make use of Kyma. So if your company has already a cloud platform enterprise agreement, so this consumption-based model in place, then you can subscribe to the Kyma service. So you can enable the Kyma runtime in a SAP account, which is based on Microsoft Azure. As right now, we only run on Microsoft Azure. It's on the roadmap to work as well, or to provide options as well for Kyma runtime to be deployed on Amazon Web Services. But for now, again, it's just Azure. Then if you're a partner company and you rather want to have a managed Kyma with a test demo development license, that's possible via Partner Edge. So there it's like a fixed sizing. I mean, if you're a partner, you know the model, so it's more of a subscription model with a very little scaling actually in there. Whereas in the left side with the CVEA model, I mean, it scales up quite high because it should be actually covering whatever load you put on there. And then if you just want to try it out, you can trigger the Kyma runtime creation as well in the Cloud Platform trial. So we are there since end of September. It's a small size, of course. It's sufficient to go through the Get Started tutorial. Yeah, but it's only for one person. It's not for the whole team. And probably you know the limitations of the trial. But the good news is you can connect this trial environment as well to the SAP CX solutions that we mentioned. Or you can just use an application mock to fake an application being connected, and you can trigger events and so on and call an API and always get a standard reply. But it's good to get started. It's good to get to know the Kyma runtime, to look at the components that Gaurav highlighted, and as well to walk through the tutorials. So then the last slide includes now the different links, and you will receive the slides as far as I understood, Lena. So you will get access to this here. So we've got like the blogs, so it points to our tag in the community, starting from the top left. We've got the help documentation, the mission in Discovery Center to get started, to get to know the different components. But to be honest, like after the session and after the details that Gaurav and Jamie shared, I think you wouldn't need this mission anymore. But what's more interesting then is the beginner tutorial in the tutorial navigator, and as well the content which was shared as part of the Devtoberfest this year. So the week number 7 was about Kyma. And then we've got some samples on GitHub. So you can have a look into deploying different microservices, creating functions, creating UI user interfaces in different languages, and so on. So these things are in the sample repository on GitHub. And if you want to get serious and your company has a use case which would be realized, your company or your customer, if you're a partner, and you have a concrete use case that you would like to realize in the Kyma runtime to use it in production, we've got an early adopter care program. So your company can sign up for this. It's free of charge. And then we would touch base with you on a regular basis, set up a project with a defined and a clear goal. And the goal means that you use the first extension case, or you use like you put a first application, even independent of any SAP application, into production. And during that path, I mean, we support you in getting started, answer any questions about Kyma, the technology, and as well, of course, get your feedback on what's still missing. And then there's a webinar from a German customer and the implementation partner on how they use Commerce Cloud in combination with Kyma. They, in the webinar, use the Kyma open source project, but in the end, as you saw, it's not much of a difference like from the components. So you can just relate to what they present and think about similar use cases for your company. And on the right side, we point to the open source website and its documentation. And there we have as well a community, like an open Slack channel. And of course, the code is all on GitHub. All right. That's really it from our side. So that was the content we wanted to share. Unless Jamie or Gaurav, you have something to add?
No, nothing from my side. But yeah, in case there are any questions, we can take.
Let's see if there's anything in the chat or in the Q&A pod. So right now there isn't.
Everything got answered. Perfect. And I think you provided a lot of resources now at the end of your presentation as well. So I think this is really the complete starter pack for you guys to get started with Kyma Runtime. And as Marco mentioned as well, like TechEd 2020 registration is open from today onwards. And I shared the link in the chat with you guys as well. With that, I really thanks a lot to Marco, Gaurav, and Jamie for you guys that you presented us all those insights and for your time. And to all out there, thanks a lot for participating and joining us in this SAP Community Call. Take care, everyone, and hopefully see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.